I only meant to go back for a scarf. That's all, a simple wool scarf I had left draped across my daughter's sofa, a faded blue one my late husband gave me on our 30th anniversary. I told myself it was silly to return for it, but as I stepped onto the gravel path toward Lily's porch, the air shifted. The ocean breeze stilled, my feet crunched too loudly in the quiet, and then through the half-open window, I heard Thomas's voice. Low, sharp, nothing like the polite tones he usually reserved for me. "Don't worry, the house by the shore will be ours soon." My breath caught in my throat. The scarf was suddenly the least important thing in the world. Before I go further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stumbled onto a truth you weren't supposed to hear, a moment that stopped your heart cold? Share how this story makes you feel in the comments, and let me know where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe so you don't miss the rest of what happened. My name is Evelyn Hartman. I'm 72 years old, a retired librarian who's lived most of my life in a small coastal town in Oregon. I've spent decades surrounded by the sound of waves and the smell of salt raising my daughter alone after my husband George never came home from a storm at sea. Books kept me company, and this old house by the water became my anchor, my refuge, the place I thought I would grow old in peacefully. But standing there by the window listening to Thomas's hushed words, I realized that everything I had built was suddenly in danger. I pressed my palm against the siding of the house as if I could steady both myself and the walls that had seen my entire life unfold. His voice carried again colder this time, talking about paperwork, about signatures, about how she won't even know what hit her. My daughter's name, Lily, slipped from his lips, too tangled into the scheme. My knees felt weak, but I dared not move. I had been blind, before blind with trust, blind with motherly pride. Now my ears burned with every word I heard. The scarf, the porch, the setting sun, all of it blurred. What remained sharp was the betrayal rising like a tide inside me. I remembered the nights I babysat their children so they could go out the weekends I cooked for them because they said they were too busy. Every gesture of love had become another stone in the trap they were building. I leaned back, careful not to let the shadow of my body cross the window frame. My heart hammered so loudly I feared they might hear it inside. The waves crashed in the distance, but Thomas's words were louder. "She's old. She doesn't understand these legal things. By the time she realizes, it'll be too late." Too late. The phrase sliced through me like broken glass. They thought of me as weak, confused, a woman past her prime. But as I stood there, gripping the siding, a clarity washed over me that I hadn't felt in years. They had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated me. And in that moment, I knew the scarf wasn't what I had come back for. I had returned to find the truth, and the truth had found me. I stayed there, pressed against the siding, holding my breath as if the whole house might exhale and give me away. The waves rolled in, steady as always, yet inside me, everything cracked and shifted. I told myself it had to be a misunderstanding, that perhaps Thomas was bluffing to someone on the phone, exaggerating. But then I heard another voice, my daughter's voice, Lily. It was unmistakable, the soft cadence I had known since the day she first called me Mama. Only this time it was stripped of warmth, laced with calculation. "Don't worry, Thomas," she said, her tone disturbingly calm. "She trusts me completely. She signed those loan papers without blinking. She thought it was for a family cafe. Imagine our own business, a legacy for the kids. A cafe, that's what she had told me, yes. That we would all invest together, that the grandchildren would someday look back and say, 'Grandma helped start it all.'" I remembered the way her eyes had glistened that afternoon, the way she pressed my hand when I hesitated over the stack of papers. "It's just a formality, Mom. You know I'd never mislead you." But now, here she was admitting it was never about coffee or family dreams. It was about my home, my anchor, the place her father and I built brick by brick after years of scrimping and saving. The papers weren't an investment. They were a mortgage. I never needed one designed to bleed me dry until the bank swooped in. Thomas's voice cut in colder than the ocean wind. "The best part is, we don't even need to push. Age will do the work for us. A few slip-ups here, a little forgetfulness there, and the court will believe she's losing it. The attorney said it's simple once you prove mental decline. Clean, legal, done. I felt my knees buckle, but I clung to the siding, refusing to collapse. They were planning not just to take my house, but to rewrite who I was, to turn me into a fragile, confused old woman, incapable of handling her own affairs. Me, who still read 3 novels a month, who could balance a checkbook to the penny, who had lived alone since George died without ever missing a bill. They wanted to erase all that, reduce me to a burden in the eyes of the law. And Lily, my Lily, laughed. That sound pierced deeper than any blade. I remembered her laughter as a child, bright as bells, filling our kitchen when her father tossed her in the air. This laugh was different, hollow, empty. She'll never suspect Thomas. She loves helping with the kids, cooking for us. Everyone thinks we're the perfect family. When the time comes, we'll look like saints. A tear slid down my cheek, hot against the cool evening air. Every pancake I had flipped, every scraped knee I had bandaged for those children, every Sunday dinner I had prepared. It was all being twisted into evidence of my supposed dependence. My love had become their weapon. I wanted to storm inside to demand an explanation, to shout Lily's name until she looked me in the eye and remembered who I was. But I stayed silent. Not out of fear. No, the fear had already burned itself into something harder, resolve. If I burst in now, they would cover their tracks, they would smile sweetly, and I'd be left with nothing but the echo of their voices in my memory. Instead, I backed away each step, careful, deliberate, like walking on shattered glass. At the edge of the path, I paused, gripping the scarf in my hands. George's scarf. I could almost hear his voice, steady and calm. Evelyn, don't give them the satisfaction. Think, plan. So I did. I slid into my car, my heart still pounding, and sat there in the dim glow of the dashboard. My phone buzzed a message from Lily. Mom, did you find your scarf? I thought I saw it on the sofa, but you were gone. I stared at her words, so casual, so innocent, as though her voice hadn't just turned my world upside down. I typed back slowly. Couldn't find it, honey. Don't worry, I have another. It was a lie, but then again they had lied too. The difference was that I had heard the truth, and they had no idea the ground beneath their careful plan had just shifted. I sat there in my car long after the engine cooled, staring out at the horizon where the sea bled into the fading sky. My hands clutched George's scarf, the fabric rough with age, yet steady in my grip. Their voices still echoed in my head, cold and sharp, but another sound began to rise. The memory of my husband's laughter carried on the wind, like it always was when he returned from a long trip at sea. George, my George. He was a fisherman, broad-shouldered and stubborn, who swore the ocean would one day take him, but never told me it would be so soon. I can still see that storm, the news reports, the frantic calls from the harbor, the empty chair at the kitchen table. He never came home, and in one terrible night, I was no longer a wife, but a widow. That house by the shore became everything then. Our castle, he called it. We had saved every nickel-skipped vacations, patched hand-me-down clothes just to make the down payment. 2 bedrooms, a sagging porch, a roof that leaked during heavy rain. But it was ours. It was where Lily took her first steps, where George fixed nets on the back deck, where we hosted neighbors with clam chowder and cheap wine. That house held our laughter, our arguments, our dreams. It held George. And Lily, oh Lily, she was the center of my world. After George's death, I poured everything I had left into her, maybe too much. I worked double shifts at the diner, cleaned rooms at the seaside motel until my hands cracked and bled from bleach. Every aching muscle, every dollar tip went to her future. I wanted her to have what I never did, a private school, new books, shiny shoes, the chance to see the world. I still remember standing at the airport the day she flew to Europe for her study program. My chest swelled with pride even as my heart ached with loneliness. I told myself, this is worth it, Evelyn. She'll come back stronger, wiser, grateful. I thought she'd look at me one day and see not just a mother, but a woman who had built her future out of broken fingernails and sleepless nights. Instead, tonight I stood outside her window, listening to her laugh at how easily I signed my life away. I leaned back against the car seat, the weight of years pressing down. Memory after memory reeled before me. Lily at 5, demanding a dollhouse I couldn't afford until I pawned George's watch. Lily at 16, rolling her eyes when I couldn't buy her a car like her friends' parents did. Lily at 25, standing in a white dress while I drained my savings to pay for her wedding, Thomas smiling beside her, promising me she would be cared for. And now those promises lay shattered at my feet, my sacrifices twisted into weapons, my devotion reshaped into leverage. I had mistaken indulgence for love and trust for loyalty. The scarf slipped through my hands and landed in my lap. I stared at it, at the frayed threads that had survived decades of storms. George would never have let this happen. He would have seen through Thomas's charm, through Lily's practiced smiles. He would have protected me. But George was gone, and now it was my turn to protect myself. A sudden clarity cut through the grief. If I didn't fight everything George's years at sea, my nights bent over diner counters, every sacrifice would be for nothing. The house would vanish, my dignity along with it. They thought my age was weakness, but 72 years had taught me resilience, and tonight I felt it blaze within me like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. I started the engine, the headlights carving 2 pale lines across the dark road home. My fingers tightened on the wheel. Behind me lay betrayal. Ahead of me, something else. I didn't know yet what shape it would take, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had spent a lifetime giving everything to Lily. Now, for the first time, I would give something back to myself, the fight she never saw coming. The decision settled in me like stone. I would not confront them yet. Not with rage, not with tears. I would play the role they had written for me, the fragile old woman trusting a little slow. But behind the mask, I would be listening, watching, recording. It didn't take long for Thomas to start showing up at my door. He arrived with that same polished smile, his tie too tight for a seaside afternoon, his leather shoes squeaking on my porch. He carried grocery bags, once a bouquet, another time, even a box of herbal tea for my nerves. He spoke in that syrupy tone people use with toddlers or pets. "Evelyn, you really shouldn't be living alone in such a big house. What if you fall? What if you forget the stove? Lily and I just want you safe." I nodded, wrung my hands, and thanked him for his concern. Then I went into the kitchen and slipped George's old tape recorder into my cardigan pocket. It was an outdated thing, heavy and clunky, but it worked. I pressed the red button while Thomas droned on about how stressful mortgage payments must feel for someone my age. Every word landed on that magnetic tape like nails in a coffin. A week later, Lily came by. She breezed in with the smell of expensive perfume, kissed my cheek, and glanced around the house as though she were already rearranging the furniture in her mind. "Mom, you'd be so much happier with us," she said, sipping coffee at my kitchen table. "The kids would love having you closer, and you wouldn't be so lonely." Lonely. That word stung, but I forced a smile and stared at the steam rising from my cup. "Maybe you're right, honey. I'll think about it." Her eyes lit up just for a flicker, and I knew she believed she had me. The recorder hidden under the tablecloth hummed quietly, catching every syllable. I began to perfect the act. I asked the same questions twice, feigned confusion over small details, even left my reading glasses on the counter by mistake. Thomas praised Lily for her patience, chuckling as though I weren't in the room. And all the while, I tucked away their words, building a case one conversation at a time. But secrets have a way of being discovered sometimes when you least expect it. One afternoon, as I adjusted the recorder in my purse, I heard a small gasp from the doorway. It was Mia, my neighbor's granddaughter, 19, all freckles and restless energy. She often stopped by to help with groceries or mow the lawn for a few extra dollars. She stared at the device in my hands, her eyes wide. "Mrs. Hartman, are you spying on them?" she whispered. My heart froze. For a moment I thought of denying it, but her gaze was too earnest, too piercing. So I closed the recorder with a snap and patted the seat beside me. "Come sit, Mia." She did, folding her long legs awkwardly, waiting. My voice trembled at first, but the words poured out the phone call through the window. The forged dream of a cafe, the talk of me losing my mind. I told her everything. Mia's face shifted from shock to anger. That's awful. They can't do that to you. Oh, but they can, I murmured. They think they can. That's why I need proof. That's why I need you not to say a word. She nodded fiercely, her ponytail bouncing. I won't tell anyone. I promise. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. Not because I trusted the law yet, not because I believed in miracles, but because someone else, someone young, sharp, untouched by betrayal, knew my truth. I wasn't completely alone anymore. That night, as I rewound the tape and listened to Thomas's syrupy voice insisting I was too tired to handle finances, I smiled a bitter smile. Let them believe I was fading. Let them think I was already halfway gone. They had no idea how awake I truly was. That night after Mia left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the recorder heavy in my hands. I knew what I had captured was dangerous for them but fragile for me. If they suspected I was on to them, the charade would crumble too soon. I needed help, someone who could see the fine print, the traps hidden in polite words and legal jargon. The next morning, I called Helen. We taught Sunday school together decades ago, back when Lily still wore pigtails and colored outside the lines. Helen had retired from teaching history years earlier, but her mind was as sharp as the day she first stood in front of a chalkboard. She came over with her glasses dangling from a beaded chain, a thermos of black coffee in one hand. I spread the loan papers across the table like a deck of cursed cards. "Can you look?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I wanted. Helen adjusted her glasses, scanning line by line. It didn't take long. Her lips pressed into a hard line. "Evelyn," she said, her voice low and grave, "this isn't a loan for a cafe. This is a mortgage against your house. The interest rate alone would drown you within a year." Her words struck like thunder, even though I already suspected the truth. Seeing it in black and white, confirmed by someone I trusted, it ripped the last veil from my eyes. I had signed my future away because I wanted to believe my daughter. Helen put her hand over mine. "You need a lawyer, a good one, and fast." That's how I found David Ramirez. His office sat above a bakery downtown, the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting through the halls like a cruel reminder that life could still be sweet. David was in his 60s with silver hair combed neatly and a gaze that didn't waver. He listened as I laid out everything: the scarf, the window, the recorder, the papers Helen had dissected. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "What you're describing is financial exploitation of the elderly. It's more common than you'd believe. But here's the challenge: they've kept themselves technically legal. They're counting on your silence, your age, your hesitation." "Then, what do I do?" I asked, feeling the weight of 72 years pressing down. He leaned forward. "First, we prove you're mentally competent. Psychological and financial capacity evaluations. If anyone tries to claim you're confused, we'll have evidence to crush that argument. Second, we gather more proof of their intent, recordings, documents, witnesses. Third, we prepare for a fight. A fight." The word sparked something inside me. For weeks I had played the fool, but now I felt the stirrings of defiance. Later that week, Mia stopped by again. Her eyes carried the fire of someone who believed injustice should never win. She told me about her boyfriend, Ethan. "He's studying journalism," she said. "He's already working on stories about scams in small towns. He could help get your story out if it comes to that." At first, I hesitated. Bringing a stranger into this web felt dangerous. But when Ethan came over, a tall young man with ink-stained fingers and a notebook already half-filled, I saw determination in his face. He wasn't just curious, he was furious. "They think they can bury you in silence," Ethan said, tapping his pen. "But sunlight is the best disinfectant. If the law drags its feet, public pressure can move mountains." I looked around my kitchen at the photographs of Lily as a child, at George's fishing knife, still hanging by the back door. My life had been built on sacrifice, on trust, on love, and now it balanced on the edge of betrayal. But I was no longer alone. Helen with her sharp eyes, David with his steady voice, Mia with her youthful loyalty, Ethan with his restless fire. A small army was gathering around me, and for the first time since that night at the window, I believed I might actually win. I thought I had grown used to their voices, their honeyed words, the subtle barbs hidden under concern, but nothing prepared me for that dinner. It was a Saturday evening, the kind when the ocean air turns damp and the gulls cry louder than usual. Lily had invited me over, saying she missed our family meals. I knew better. My stomach churned as I walked up the porch steps, but I carried George's old recorder in my purse, its red light ready to catch every lie. The table was set too perfectly, candles flickering against polished silverware. Thomas poured wine, Lily ladled stew into my bowl, as though we were in some magazine spread. But beneath the surface, their eyes gleamed with urgency. Mom Lily began softly folding her napkin with exaggerated care. "We've been thinking. It's time to make things easier for you." Thomas slid a neat stack of papers across the table. "It's just a simple power of attorney," he said. His smile stretched thin. "Nothing complicated. It'll let us handle bills, manage accounts, take some of that stress off your shoulders." The words struck me like cold water. Power of attorney. The final step in their plan. I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I lifted the first page. "Oh, this is a lot to take in," I murmured, my voice cracking with practice frailty. Maybe I should have a little more time to think. I don't want to make a mistake." Lily reached across the table, squeezing my wrist. "Mom, you trust us, don't you? You've always trusted me." Her grip was firmer than her tone, her nails digging slightly into my skin. I nodded weakly. "Of course I trust you, honey. I just need a little more time." Beneath the table, hidden by the long tablecloth, my fingers brushed the recorder. I pressed the button. A faint click swallowed by the clink of cutlery. Thomas sighed, leaning back. His mask slipped just a fraction, the edge in his voice sharpening. "The truth is, Evelyn, once the paperwork confirms what everyone already suspects, that your memory isn't what it used to be, all of this will be so much simpler. The courts won't even question it. And then, everything will belong to us." The words sliced through the air. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My own daughter sat silently, not protesting, not flinching. The betrayal was complete. I forced my eyes to widen, my lips to tremble as though confused. "My memory," I whispered. "Yes," Thomas said smoothly, mistaking my act for weakness. "You forget things. You repeat yourself. Judges notice these things. We're just trying to protect you." But outside, through the thin walls and half-open window, another pair of ears caught the truth. Mia. I had asked her to water the hydrangeas while I was inside. She must have paused, hearing his words frozen among the flowers. I glanced at the flicker of shadow moving across the garden. Relief flooded me. I wasn't alone in hearing it this time. I let the silence stretch, pretending to mull it over while the recorder captured every syllable, every dangerous slip of their tongues. My heart pounded, but I kept my mask intact, the trembling mother too gentle to fight, too fragile to resist. Dinner ended with forced smiles, Thomas folding the papers back into his briefcase, Lily kissing my cheek too quickly. I left with a container of leftovers in my hands and proof burning a hole in my purse. That night, sitting at my own kitchen table, I replayed the tape. His voice was clear, undeniable. "Once she's officially incompetent, everything belongs to us." I pressed the recorder to my chest and closed my eyes. The mask had cracked not mine, but theirs, and soon the world would see the faces behind it. When I left Lily's house that night, clutching the container of stew like a prop from a cruel play, I knew the time for silence was over. Their words weren't just whispers anymore, they were weapons sharpened and aimed at me. But I had caught the blade before it struck. Now it was my turn. The very next morning, I called David Ramirez. My hands shook as I held the phone, but not from fear, from urgency, from fire. "David," I said when he answered, "I have what you asked for, and more." At his office, I placed the recorder on his desk, the cassette still warm from last night's confession. Beside it, I laid out the loan papers Helen had dissected and the notes Mia had written after hearing Thomas's slip. My evidence looked so small in that tidy office, but to me, it was a fortress. David pressed play, the room filled with Thomas's voice, smug and careless. Once she's officially incompetent, everything belongs to us. David's eyes narrowed. This, he said, is gold. Evelyn, you've given me exactly what we need. He called in a colleague from the Elder Justice Network, a woman named Marcia, who had spent 20 years fighting financial predators. Together, they explained the next steps: a petition to invalidate the mortgage, a restraining order to stop any further action on my house, and a lawsuit against both Lily and Thomas for exploitation and fraud. For the first time, I saw a path forward that wasn't just survival. It was justice. But the story didn't end there. Ethan, restless as ever, had been digging. He met me at a cafe 2 days later, his notebook bulging with scribbles. He pushed a file across the table. Thomas isn't just reckless, Ethan said, his voice low. He's drowning. He owes over $150,000 credit cards, personal loans, business lines, and that's not all. I found a woman in Astoria, a widow in her 80s. He did the same thing to her, got her to sign mortgage papers, then stripped her of her house. She died in a nursing home penniless. I stared at the bile rising in my throat. Another woman, another life crushed. I wasn't his first victim, I was simply his next. What about Lily? I asked, almost dreading the answer. Ethan looked at me carefully. She's not innocent, Evelyn. I found emails. She knew. She was part of it from the beginning. The air around me seemed to collapse. My daughter, my only child, not just complicit, but an architect. She hadn't been swept along by Thomas's greed. She had steered the ship with him. I thought of her as a little girl, clutching my hand on her first day of school, of the nights I worked double shifts to pay her tuition, of George's proud smile when she returned from Europe polished and confident. And now this truth. My sacrifices had been twisted into her weapons, but grief turned quickly to resolve. If she had chosen to stand with him, then she would fall with him. When I returned to David's office, I felt different, lighter, in a way. I handed him Ethan's findings. Use everything I said, every debt, every victim, and make sure they see that Lily wasn't dragged, she walked in willingly. David nodded. You're not just protecting yourself anymore. You're protecting others, and the court will see that. As I walked back to my car, the salty wind from the Pacific whipped my hair across my face. For months, I had felt like a ship caught in a storm, helpless against waves of betrayal. But now I was steering again, and I wasn't sailing alone. The lawsuit was filed that week. Thomas and Lily thought they were tightening the noose around me, but they had no idea it was their own rope. The weeks that followed felt like walking through fog, every step heavy, every sound muffled by the echo of betrayal. Yet through that fog, I saw a light, the courthouse, the place where truth would finally step out of the shadows. On the morning of the trial, I sat in the wooden pew, my heart rattling like an old clock. Thomas entered first, polished as ever, his suit too crisp, his smile too smug. Lily followed, her face pale, her eyes darting anywhere but toward me. I searched her features for even a flicker of the child I had raised, but all I saw was calculation drained of its charm. The judge called the court to order. David rose steady as a lighthouse in the storm and laid out the case. The forged dream of a cafe, the predatory mortgage, the plan to paint me as incompetent. He played the recording, and the courtroom froze as Thomas's voice filled the air. Once she's officially incompetent, everything belongs to us. I watched as the mask finally shattered. Gasps rippled across the benches. Thomas shifted in his chair, sweat gathering at his collar. Lily shrank into herself, her lips pressed thin as parchment. Then came Ethan's findings, delivered with the precision of a knife. $150,000 in debt, a trail of exploitation stretching to other widows, other homes lost. The pattern was undeniable. And Lily's emails, her words in black and white proof that she hadn't been dragged into this scheme but had walked willingly beside him. When it was my turn to testify, I stood slowly, my knees aching but my spine unbent. I told the court about George, about the house we had built with sweat and sacrifice, about the child I had cherished more than my own breath. My voice cracked, but I did not cry. I may be 72, I said, but I am not broken. I am not confused, and I will not be erased from my own home or my own life. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was the silence of truth being heard. The verdict came swiftly. Thomas guilty of fraud and elder abuse, sentenced to years behind bars. Lily convicted as an accomplice, spared prison but stripped of inheritance. Rights, her name stained by her own choices. When the gavel struck, I felt no triumph, only a quiet release, like a storm finally passing. My daughter was lost to me not by death, but by betrayal. That wound would never fully heal. Yet the house was still mine, the walls still carried George's laughter, and for the first time in months, I could breathe freely inside them. The court awarded compensation enough to repair what they had tried to break. But money was never the prize. Dignity was. Freedom was. In the months that followed, I found myself drawn to something new. With Helen at my side and Mia, bright, fearless Mia, eager to help, we started volunteering with a local group that taught seniors how to spot scams, how to guard their lives from wolves dressed as family. I told my story not as a victim, but as a warning, and every time an old man or woman nodded in understanding, I felt the burden grow lighter. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Mia and I sat on the porch. The ocean rolled endlessly before us. The same ocean that had once taken George, the same ocean that had watched me almost lose everything. She leaned against the railing, her hair catching the last light of day. "Mrs. Hartman," she said softly. "Do you ever regret fighting back?" I looked at her. This young woman who had stumbled into my secret and become my ally. My lips curved into a tired but genuine smile. "There are families we're born into," I told her, my eyes fixed on the waves, "and families we never expected, but they remind us that hope is still possible." The gulls cried overhead, the sea breathed steady, and for the first time in years I felt a peace that was truly mine.